Hi, everybody. I'm BJ Fadum. I'm on the board for the Billy DeFrank Center, and I'm here today with two people that are going to talk to you a little bit about coming out trans. With us today is Lance and Davina. Lance is a trans man, Davina is a trans woman. So, welcome, both of you.
Hi.
Here.
So, let me ask you, let's start, Davina. How old would you say you were when you started realizing you were trans, whether you knew the word or not?
Yeah, it's really easy to look back and see a lot of things, but at the time I was completely unaware of what was happening to me. Um, I the first thing that I really clearly remember was being bullied in high school for being gay, even though I'm exclusively attracted to women. Um, and so there was some feminine or effeminate quality that was coming out of me that I wasn't consciously aware of. That other people, back in the 90s, the word for that was gay. I don't think, and I did, I didn't think I even understood what trans was at the time. So since I looked into it, realized that I was not in any way attracted to men, and sort of just gave up on the idea, um, and thought that I was completely straight for almost 20 years.
Wow. And that brings up a good point that gender and sexual orientation is completely two different things.
Yeah.
Which, so Lance, how old were you when you started to think about, are you trans, or even if you knew that word?
That word didn't exist. There was no internet. There was no word like transgender. I was about 6 when I was really clear that I was a boy, except for that wasn't a thing I could talk about. There was like an inherent shame to it. So I grew up essentially hiding that entire internal experience that was really vivid but never spoken. I remember being about 10 and my sister making a joke that God had made a mistake, that I was clearly supposed to be a boy, and wanting so hard to say yes, except for I didn't go with the concept, but also the bullying stuff would not have been good. Um, so yeah, it wasn't until I was 14 about when a tennis player transitioned. And that was the first time I ever had the concept that it was possible, and that I was not the only person in the universe who felt that way, because I totally believed as a kid I was the only person who ever felt that way.
The feeling of isolation, Davina, is that your experience, that you feel you're isolated, that you're the only one?
Yeah. I mean, I really didn't understand what I was experiencing, but it was very isolating. And I did feel very alone. Um, I mean, now I'm very lucky, very blessed to be in the Bay Area, where there's a lot of acceptance and a lot of information about it. But growing up and most of my life, and I just having no idea why I was experiencing what I was experiencing. Um, and I was very repressed, and it took it took a long time for me to really break out of my repressions and accept myself.
So, Lance, when did you said your sister would joke, but you wouldn't respond yes, because even though you felt that way, how old were you when you decided to come out to, and who was the first person you came out to as trans?
So I was like 37 when I first encountered another trans person, particularly another trans guy. And once I met him, I couldn't let go of the concept, because it was like, oh, this is the thing, right? Because before that, there was no thing. So I was pretty quickly on one website that did exist, and reading books, most of which were sort of terrible from our current perspective on transsexual people, and the big battle between transsexual and transgender and all of that. So first probably was coming out to people Was friends, probably when I was about 38, 39. I was already perceived as being butch and had taken a male name in the leather community. So it wasn't like it was a big shock for my friends. So I got a lot of support. Later, I told my mom, and she was discombobulated and had to go do some thinking on her own, but that was good for her. And we're really close now, closer than we've ever been. On the other hand, I have not heard from my father since I told him. So it's now like 20 years with no contact with my dad. And my sister is also pretty much no contact. But other than those two, my life is so much more rich, and that letting go of the repression, like you can actually be yourself. That is one of the, I think, the big journeys in being trans is of like exposing all those things that you kept hid. But it makes for much richer relationships, since now I'm very abundant in friendships and sweeties and communities and all of that.
So Davina, when did you finally decide to come out, and who was the first person you came out to, and how did that turn out?
Yeah, so I didn't figure it out until I was 38 years old myself. And interestingly enough, the first person I came out to was an ex who was intersex and had been active in trans advocacy, and they were the only person who has rejected me. It was very interesting. And then I think the second person was my younger brother, and he was just like, yeah, okay, I'll call you my sister then. And my family was very open and accepting. All of my friends, classmates and colleagues were all very accepting. So, the last person on earth I expected to reject me is the only person who has rejected me. Very interesting that way.
Very interesting. You just can't predict their responses.
Yeah.
So then once you decide that you are trans and you're starting to come out, Lance, when did you decide I'm going to actually transition, hormones, whatever surgical you decide? When did you start looking into that?
Pretty quickly. I went to the DeFrank Center looking for resources, and there was one trans group there, but it was 98.9% trans women. And though there's still useful info there, it's definitely tilted a different direction. So I actually started pretty quickly trying to put together a group for trans men at the center, which is actually still running. But around that same time, the group got solidified about the time I already had figured out the medical stuff. I had a friend who was trans, went to see his endocrinologist, started getting testosterone, then started desperately trying to find ways to save some money to get top surgery. So those two things happened pretty quickly. Other processes I went through were, a few years later for each of them. Yeah, once I finally understood and saw a way through, I really quickly wanted to start making the physical changes, since that was really important to me.
So Davina, what about you? When did you decide and start looking into, I want to do hormones or whatever surgical changes you wanted to make?
Yeah, well, once I figured it out or had the idea that this might be it, I obsessively researched for about 2 or 3 months. And then reading through Reddit threads and online forums and a couple of books. And I came across something that said, get some internet hormones and try it if you're not sure. And if you take the right hormones and it's correct, you'll know. So I got, a menopausal estrogen gel off Amazon. And I remember putting it on my face and feeling this brain fog and depression that I had struggled with all my life, like melting out of my brain from the first dose. And so I'm like, okay, I think I'm on the right track. And so I started with the gel before getting a well, I waited to go through the process to get a prescription.
Wow.
And surgeries, are something that I'll think about in a couple of years, but I feel really good on the hormones.
Great. How did you feel, Lance, when you first started the hormones? Did it really change the way you felt?
Oh, for sure. And actually, to follow on to what Davina said, I was really opposed to the medical community deciding my life for me. So I also did illegal hormones for a while that I got over the internet or whatever. And I felt like I was floating on a cloud. It was just like, you could never take this away from me. And after I did like 6 or 8 months, I'm like, okay, this is clearly the right path. So now it's time to actually engage the medical world, since now I've made my decision. Because there was a lot more gatekeeping back when I started. Right now, you can do like, you're an adult, you can sign the email information. I mean, different places have different requirements, but you can proceed pretty quickly. Whereas I had to go through therapy and sign-offs and blah, blah, blah. So it was a big thing, but I knew it was the right thing.
Great. So let me ask for both of you, what was your biggest fear in actually starting to come out trans? What were some of the fears and the challenges that you found, especially at the beginning of your transitions?
At the beginning, I was so self-conscious. You feel like you're walking around with like a big neon sign. The truth is you're completely invisible. And it's like going into the men's bathroom. It's like I had to have a friend teach me the rules, and like trans guys will worry about how it sounds when you're peeing. Nobody cares. But you don't know that when you're starting out and you think that your world is the center. And I was afraid of losing relationships. If I was kind of like, sex is already complicated, it really can't be that much more complicated. But that sense of being, how am I going to be perceived? And that's a really uncomfortable place until things settle down both internally and externally. It's just a process you have to go through.
What about you, Davina? And you're talking about being misgendered in public until you transition?
Yeah, so I kind of transitioned in stages, partly because I was really terrified about my presentation, and I read a lot of horror stories, which really, in the Bay Area in this day and age, I'm very safe, and like Lance was saying, no one cares. Like, I would go out sometimes and I knew my presentation was really bad, like my stubble was sticking through my makeup and my voice wasn't quite right, and no one cared. Everybody just went about their lives and ignored you. So I had a lot of fear about how I would be received, and then was very, so I came out in stages and, got a little bolder and a little bolder each time I would go out in public. I'm very grateful that each time, I either had positive or completely neutral situations. People either ignored me or engaged with me positively.
Wow. So, and Lance, you brought up the fact sex is already a little bit complicated. So were either one of you already in a relationship as you transitioned?
Yeah. I had a boyfriend at the time. He was really important to me. He was one of the first people I met who was trans, and we happened to click. So I was really fortunate. He was the only person I had a trans conversation with, but it was really important. And he was super helpful as I went through the process. And, later relationships, sometimes I started in I had a girlfriend who didn't know I was trans and we started going out. So there's all kinds of complicated things to navigate there. But again, being in the Bay Area, among connected communities, it's safer than in a lot of places.
So Davina, in dating, and you said you were attracted to women, did you ever get rejected by a partner because of being trans?
I started coming out just as the lockdown started with COVID, so I haven't really dated since I came out. Like I've been on some of the apps, but they've never translated into an in-person meeting. So I haven't faced that yet.
So is there any fear in dating as a trans person?
Of course, obviously there is, especially since I would be dating as a lesbian. But like what I've done on my profile is I just stay up front that, you know, I'm trans, and then I don't match with the people who have a problem with that.
Lance, any trepidations regarding dating as a trans person, or challenges, or any recommendations or advice to trans people as far as the dating, what from your experience?
I think Davina has it right. The thing to do if you're doing apps and whatever is just put it out there, because minimalize the drama that way. I remember being like at Renegade's gay bar, you know, flirting with some guys and being really nervous. You know, what is safe, what isn't safe. It's better to put stuff out there right away before you put yourself in a vulnerable position. And all of that said, you know, saying you're going to places that you like and they're comfortable for you, your chances are going to be higher there of finding someone to connect with. But, you know, that nervousness is always going to be there, at least so far for me. But yeah. I've also had good luck, so I'm happy.
So any last words of advice to anybody out there that is coming out trans? Davina, you first.
You know, be yourself. It is worth it. Whatever you're afraid of is not, it will be better than you expect, and being your true and authentic self will make you the person where you will work things out better.
Lance, parting advice.
No, I would completely go with that. There's always a bunch of fear and worrying about other people's judgments, but you can really only live your own life. And so being authentic and gives you your best life, and follow your heart and all that good stuff.
Great.
And let the fear win.
Thank you both. Lance, Davina, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences of coming out trans. Thank you.
Thanks for